Now it's our turn to, sorry for the words, but put our balls on the table.
Remember, kids, this is not how you play hockey. It's just ugly.
I like it.
Screw you guys. I'm doing this.
You know what? I love ice cream too.
Go back to Canada, Guy Lafleur.
Game on!
Yeah, game on.
Hello, and welcome in to another episode of the Hockey Show right here on Mile High Sports. JJ Derez, Ryan Bolden here to talk all things hockey. Ryan, our first episode of this hockey show came to the public the week after last year's Stanley Cup. Right now, it's the week after this year's Stanley Cup. It feels like we've done a full year. While it might not be a calendar year, we basically made it through a full season here.
Congratulations to us.
Go us.
The
Go
crowd
Hockey
goes
Show.
wild.
Oh my goodness gracious!
So yeah,
Can you believe it?
this wretched season that was the 2021 NHL season, COVID year, is finally behind us. I'm excited that it's behind us because it was terrible. I mean, let's look at the year as a whole. Let's assess before we get into the Stanley Cup final. I mean, this has to be one of the worst NHL seasons in terms of experience, excitement, and just overall fun, I feel.
I don't know about like total failure, right? I think it was a hard season. It was hard for everyone involved, for the players, for the staffs, for the media members especially. I think, what they managed to accomplish in the playoffs were pretty outstanding. From a league perspective, I think my favorite takeaway is that we do not need 82 games in a season. We just don't. Like you can have just as good a season and just as good, or maybe even better, a postseason with a shortened schedule, right? And I know it's hard to recoup your money that way as a league, but they need to figure out some way to shorten the season.
And that makes me kind of wonder, looking at Tampa Bay's struggles the last 5-6 years, and now, of course, back-to-back champs, which is hard to do, back-to-back Stanley Cups. But both of those Stanley Cups came in shortened seasons. Do you think that had anything to do with Tampa Bay's success? Because we've seen in years past how much injuries affected them and how it was tough for them to play that whole 82-game season and then the 16 wins you need in the NHL playoffs. So how much do you buy into that theory a little bit, or are you poo-pooing my idea here?
I'm poo-pooing it. I think what Tampa Bay accomplished is almost more impressive because they had to go into the bubble and win. And then this season they had to play a compressed schedule with, every team having almost every other day games, every other day games, and then just a grueling postseason push. This isn't your regular NHL, like you have all of these months off between seasons too. Like the start of next season is rapidly approaching if they want to try and start the way they normally do, as if it's a normal year. So I think what Tampa's accomplished in a rapid, fast-paced, changing world environment is impressive.
Yeah, and going back to the back-to-backs, it's only every once in a while that we see that. And I like to point out, you look back at that 95, 96 Avs team, and 97, and 98, and 99, and 2000, how good of a team we had here in Colorado, and they could never even do back-to-back. I just think that's the epitome of this accomplishment here, is going back-to-back is just the hardest thing to do. I mean, they're an amazing team, and they have an amazing foundation in place, but that's the most impressive part of this, is doing it twice, and like you said, in some of the toughest, grueling physical years that you could have had.
I was listening to the 31 Thoughts podcast post-game after the Stanley Cup was awarded, and one point that Jeff and Elliot brought up, which I think is super important, is, it's hard to get to the Stanley Cup final or to be a playoff contending team, right? It's hard to get there, but it's even harder to stay there and stay that competitive and keep that team together, financially, physically. I think what was amazing to me, and we can get into it more, but in that Stanley Cup final game for Tampa, the two guys who combined for the goal are the only two guys on that roster without Stanley Cup rings, right? Like, they're the two newcomers who came in. One's a rookie. One came from Columbus, Savard, and Colton. And it's like, it speaks to the outrageous level of compete and success that team had the first go around, and they managed to stay together almost entirely for the second one. That's impressive on its own.
Along with that, I mean, like you said, those are depth guys that were scoring the championship goal, right? I mean, you didn't have Nikita Kucherov carrying all the weight the entire series there. You didn't have Steven Stamkos doing that much. And again, drawing the comparison to Colorado, does this team have that kind of depth that, say, they were in the final, that you see a fourth liner, third liner, Pierre-Edouard Bellemare scoring a game winner? I'm not sure they have that quality of depth to be able to rely on that. I mean,
they definitely didn't have it in the series against Vegas because it would have gone a different way.
Exactly. Exactly. So all the more reason to just kind of feel like this team still has a way to go. While they have been the favorites going into this season and now next season, we'll get into that a little bit later here in the show. But it just feels like there's a long way. Credit to James Marilat on his tweet that said the Avalanche lost to the team that won the Stanley Cup. So they weren't even really that close if you put it in those words.
When we talked about it on the last show, it should be the Avalanche. How would the Avalanche stack up against Tampa? Well, it doesn't matter because they couldn't beat Vegas. And for a long time, I said the team didn't face any adversity and we needed to see how they handled it, and they didn't handle it well. And I think the Habs played a phenomenal series against Vegas, really shut them down, exploited their weaknesses, and it was a bit of a David and Goliath Stanley Cup final. And no, I don't think any realistic fan had expectations of Montreal, storming the gates in this series. Maybe they could squeak one out if they could keep it close, but the way Tampa just raced through it, it was just like, you can't stop this juggernaut. You just can't.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's kind of a testament to the weakness that was the final, right? I mean, the 18th best team going up against arguably the best team in the NHL. So, that kind of stunk. I thought it was a little bit disappointing in that regard. That I honestly barely even watched the first handful of games because I knew Tampa Bay was going to clean right through it. So, in terms of an entertainment aspect, I was really disappointed by the finals. But to see Tampa Bay close it out in the way they did, and it was pretty dramatic, a 1-0 game. That's tough. You got to really grind out through that the entirety of the game. So, I think there's pros and cons to the way the final panned out.
Well, I tried to watch from different perspectives too. One thing that impressed me, it was for Tampa and Montreal, it was a bit like a old medieval kind of sword fight, with armor. Like Tampa Bay is just attacking and attacking and attacking, and eventually Montreal is going to wear out. And they're going to get their strikes in. And it felt very much that way. But it was also impressive to watch, Montreal fight back and, to win at home. I thought that was an excellent game they played. But also just trying to shut Tampa down and what they would do or not do in order to accomplish those things. But on the other hand, you look at Tampa's fourth line featuring Tyler Johnson at center. Like, it's unreal what Tampa was able to accomplish, and everybody played almost, flawlessly. And you look at goaltending. Vasilevskiy deserved the Conn Smythe hands down. The guy had 4 shutouts, in a shutout to close each round of this postseason. Just incredible work from him in the commitment from the defense and, just the whole team game. But what I really loved watching, and I don't know if you think about this in terms of adult league hockey, was Tampa sliding a forward up toward the blue line to create space. Like, I really liked seeing something unique in the hockey schematics that we generally don't see, That proves to me that John Cooper is as good a coach as he appears to be.
Agree. I like that point. And Ryan, let's look back to when COVID first started, right? We were all told to stop playing hockey. And then you went back to playing hockey recently, a month or so ago? How were you?
Timid, horribly out of shape. Now, I have no shot.
Almost
whatsoever.
like you hadn't played hockey in longer than a year, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Now look at Nikita Kucherov, missing an NHL season in its entirety, stepping right into the playoffs and performing the way he did in the playoffs. I mean, I think that's another thing that you can only wow at because, again, it takes a lot to miss that much hockey. It takes a lot away from your game. Hockey's a skill that if you aren't using it, you're losing it.
Yeah, especially the speed aspect of it. You know, there's a fitness aspect and a speed aspect, and you can't practice the speed aspect until you're in a game. And what he did was amazing. To step in, just start scoring, to lead the team in scoring, Braden Point leading the team in goals, like just unreal. But Kucherov coming in, and then we find out that he's got a fractured rib from the Scott Mayfield crosscheck, and still was performing. out there playing in what was no doubt super painful.
Absolutely. And then, of course, what everybody's talking about is his post-game presser, right? The shirtless, slamming the Bud Lights. I loved it. I think everybody loved it. And that's the thing. I'm hearing a lot of takes of, oh, if you didn't like that, then blah, blah, blah. Well, if you have a problem with Nikita Kucherov, the thing is, I'm wondering where those people are seeing that, because I haven't seen one person complain about the post-game presser from Nikita Kucherov.
Everyone in Montreal.
Well, okay, sure, because he took some shots. Shots were fired there.
Yeah,
shots were also
fired
at Marc-Andre Fleury. So I think that's fine, though. Why not let him be vocal and let him express his opinion when he's obviously right? I mean, like you said, Vasilevskiy, I think hands down is right now the best goaltender in the world, on the planet, in the universe even. I doubt they're playing much hockey in outer space. So the fact that got overlooked and the Marc-Andre Fleury won the Vezina just kind of based off the story and who he is, I think he has full right to come out and say something like that.
Well, I think the best take that I saw and that I agreed with was, for everybody who thinks hockey is a drone, we got to get pucks deep, bland, like whitewashed piece of paper sport. You want some personality. The minute you get some personality, you're like, well, he can't do that. That's not sportsmanlike. Well, who cares? This isn't youth hockey where the kids have to be nice to each other because you don't want them to grow up into giant dicks, right? These are professional athletes. Jeff Merrick said sometimes you need a villain, and he embraced that villain role and was it. But he gets to talk the talk because he walked the walk in the playoffs. He was the best player in the world, right?
Absolutely.
And he gets to say that stuff. Now, I would say he's not wrong about Vasilevskiy, but it comes back to like the heart conversation that we have where, is the most valuable player in the league the best player on a great team or the best player on a mediocre team, right? Is Vasilevskiy the best goalie in the league this year with that Tampa team in front of him compared to Marc-Andre Fleury with that team in front of him?
Yeah, so that's an easy conversation to have there when you start comparing best players, right? Who would you rather have on your team, Connor McDavid or Nikita Kucherov? I mean, Connor McDavid is obviously the best player in the NHL, but Nikita Kucherov knows how to win, and he knows how to do it in spectacular fashion, and he has more, intangibles than I think Connor McDavid would be. So who would you
Connor
want?
McDavid on Tampa.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really hard to quantify that stuff sometimes, but I think Leonard and Fleury won the Jennings Trophy for the best goalie stats of the season, the lowest numbers, right? How do you argue that person isn't deserving of the Vezina then? Mm-hmm. I think Kucherov's not wrong, but I loved it. I loved that he showed up housed. He was trashed.
Within like 30 minutes
Slurring
of the
his
game.
speech, yeah. Slurring his speech, he made jokes about how normally he only gets 2 questions, but he's already got 5. He was like ripping the media guys on the call. He's a guy, as you know from covering Russians, sometimes they don't talk frequently. I think Nichushkin had 1 press conference all season long. Varlamov used to not like to do pressers, especially early on. I was always convinced that he understood English better than he let on, so he could get out of those availabilities a bit. But I loved it. I loved everything about it.
Absolutely. And he also landed himself a sponsorship. We'll get into that here after the break. So thanks for still hanging out with us here on the Hockey Show, Mile High Sports with JJ and Ryan. We'll be right back through the break right here on Mile High Sports.
Right now, it's 16 minutes past the big hour. Is that not right, Mr. Scream? Great, good stuff. I think people are getting really cranked.
Welcome back. It's the Hockey Show. Just a couple days after the Stanley Cup Finals. Still leaving me. It's still leaving the body.
It almost feels like it's not real. Like you're at that, like the denial point. The season gets so long, you're like, ugh, I don't want to watch hockey anymore. And then it's gone, and you're like, oh no.
Yeah, and then in a couple weeks, once there just becomes silence on all fronts in the hockey world, that's kind of the time that you really get regenerated and you're excited for the next training camp. But you're right. Around this time, maybe even a couple weeks ago, you're like, I'm kind of getting burnt out. I don't really care if the Avalanche win or lose in the playoffs. But then, a month from now, late August, you're starting to get giddy again. Like, all right, let's get this excitement going. And then come November, December, you're burnt out again.
Yeah, well, especially when they're playing every other night. So hopefully the schedule is a lot better this year, and there's not 8 games in a row against Arizona.
Absolutely. Like we were talking last segment, a big conversation from the Stanley Cup final has been Nikita Kucherov's post-game press conference where he just shows up slamming Bud Lights, ends up getting an endorsement deal from Bud Light just because I'm sure that was just the beer they had in the locker room, so that's the one he grabbed. But we saw Landeskog earlier this season get a Bud Light sponsorship
Coors
too.
Light.
I thought it was Bud.
I thought it was Coors Light. I know Tyson Jost has Coors Light. I think Landeskog's a Bullet guy.
We'll look it up. But there was also some Coors Light in the news there during the Stanley Cup Finals.
Yeah, Greg Wyshynski of ESPN had a fantastic little story with quotes from Coors about how they had harvested some ice water from Game 1 in Tampa and shipped it in hydro flasks back to Colorado to Golden, where they added it to a rapid batch of beer that they brewed for a special celebratory edition of the Silver Bullet Coors Light, and it should be ready in time for the parade on the 12th in Tampa. And the quotes from Coors were great. The guy they spoke with said they de-ickified it by, I don't know, hopefully boiling it. But just, I tweeted I wanted to get some. Coors Light never tweeted me back. I'm kind of disappointed. Like, we're the hockey show in Denver. You brew the stuff here. Your social media team can't even muster a no. They just don't respond. Like, what is that? It's disappointing. Now we're going to have to go out and get a sponsorship from Bud Light, just like Kucherov, the new Bud Night. But would you try that? Like, if we got some and I brought one in, would you try it?
I think 100% you have to try it, especially if you tell me it's been de-ickified. I mean, I think that's really the grossest part. You don't want to start swallowing Pat Maroon's spit all of a sudden. But if it's clean and it's just made from clean water and then it just tastes like beer in the long run, I'd imagine it's got to be expensive, though, right? How many of those bottles are they making? They can't have too much.
I don't know. It's a limited run, and I don't know if I could do it. Like, just knowing and seeing. Like, I think people who don't play hockey don't comprehend the amount of bodily fluid that ends up on the ice, and no matter the level of play, right? From top to bottom. That stuff's not like purified before it gets put back out there. So sure, you can boil the germs out, but that doesn't change the fact that there might be blood or spit or sweat in it. You know, for me, it's like frog legs. Like, I've had frog legs and they're fine. It's like a waste of energy to eat this little bit of meat, right? And it tastes great. But once I start thinking about how it is the leg of a frog while I'm eating it, you're immediately like, nope, I'm done. Can't do it.
So had Coors Light sent us
I'd have done it.
Okay.
I don't know if I'd enjoyed it, but it's not too late, Coors Light.
I mean, it tastes like beer. You got to assume it tastes exactly like beer. They're not going to give you a disgusting
I think it tastes like
product.
victory, like a championship pedigree.
And that's the other thing. If you're a fan of that team, then I think 100% you get it. But it's like you just consume it and then you expel it from your body, right? Wouldn't you rather have a little melted vial, just something you can keep rather than just...
I'm not Bobby Boucher. I don't need to keep a little vial of water, but... I mean, maybe that celebratory Coors Light gets in you and changes you from the inside, and now you're a champion.
Speaking of champions, Pat Maroon sticking with the Stanley Cup Finals here, third Stanley Cup in a row. Of course, he's a role player, didn't really have many points in the Stanley Cup Final. Are you impressed by this feat, or is it more of a he just got lucky, right time, right place kind of deal for you?
I love it. I think it's incredible. I think watching him celebrate, you know, his interview with Pierre at the end of the game where he's like, I am just so happy, he could hardly talk, and then was like, I'm going to shave my beard. I'm going to shave my head. I look homeless. And apparently he put together a deal with Shave Logic during the postseason on off days, and he mentioned that in his press conference. I was like, interesting plug when he mentioned that right before he said he was going to shave and cut his hair and everything. So it's kind of cool to see some lucrative sponsorship situations for these guys. But somebody was arguing with me on Twitter like, oh, who cares about Pat Maroon? He played 8 minutes in the final game. I'm like, he scored a goal in the series, so you can't say that he didn't do anything. He didn't contribute, right? But who cares? Like, it's just salty fans now who are mad the Avs or whatever team didn't win. Like, you can't be happy for a guy to have won 3 Stanley Cups in a row with 2 different teams. Like, it's an incredible feat. People play their entire careers without winning the Stanley Cup.
I agree. I often make NBA references on this show, and here's another one coming in. It reminds me a lot of Jordan Farmar, who used to play for the Los Angeles Lakers during the Kobe Bryant era, and he ended up having 4 or 5 championships as a role player, bench player, never really did much because essentially he was Kobe Bryant's backup. So when Kobe Bryant wasn't on the floor, which was rarely, he's out there winning championships. And part of you's like, yeah, he didn't do anything. He didn't do much for that. But, of course, hockey's a much different sport to where Pat Maroon, even on the fourth line, you're still doing something. You're contributing in one way or another, even if it's not on the score sheet. So the people who are salty about it, I don't understand that. You got to be happy for a guy's success, especially having played as long as he had without success. Plus, he's just one of those locker room guys, right? He's just one of those guys that you love to hear talk. Even if he didn't get any points in that last series, he was one of the first people interviewed because he's a character. He's a gem of a human. He's a gem in the locker room. His teammates love him. Broadcasters love him. Fans love him. There's zero reason to put any hate towards Patrick Maroon.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't he agree to play for the Blues so he could be home, right, and take less money and a reduced role in order to just be home with St. Louis the year they won, right? I
think he did the same thing this year too.
He's a good dude, and it takes a lot of, humility to accept a diminished role on a team. As these guys are highly competitive, you want to be out there every shift. I've talked to players who are on the bubble trying to make it and get more ice time, saying, "How do you expect me to, prove that I can do more with 5 minutes of ice time a night?" Right? It's a really hard position to be in, but for him to come in and play his role and win 3 Stanley Cups, he's doing something that many, many players will never come close to accomplishing.
But you look around the rest of the team, and I think Tampa Bay is obviously now what's the word I'm looking for? The model organization for everybody to kind of try to.
For this current iteration of the salary cap era, I would say definitely.
For everybody to try to emulate. And one thing you notice that they've done spectacularly is draft, right? I mean, all of their big guys have been through the draft. So you automatically
rounds too.
See the importance there. So, obviously the Avalanche trying to get to that level and trying to be the eventual Stanley Cup winners. What do they have to do to try to emulate Tampa Bay more? Because, I mean, they've done pretty well through the draft. You look at the core guys. They've all been drafted. And then there's still, like I said earlier in the show, there's still a way to go for this team. What do they have to do to be more like Tampa Bay, aside from going out and getting guys like Coleman and Goudreau who are available this summer?
The wild thing, I think, is that Tampa Bay has drafted these guys in second, third, fourth rounds. They've got a handful of guys who were undrafted, right? Guys that played and won in Syracuse with John Cooper as the coach that then made the leap to the NHL. I think what the Avs are missing is there's a gap in their prospect pool that they are now recovering from, but years of drafting players who didn't pan out to anything have hurt. I was immediately struck by seeing how many second, third, fourth, fifth rounders were on this Tampa team and undrafted guys versus the Avalanche having some of the most first-round picks on any NHL team, and the way that the chips fall here or there with these guys. But what are the Avs missing? The know-how to get there and stay there to compete at the top level every night of the playoffs. They still just don't have that experience. 3 second-round exits in a row, it's not doing any egos any good in that locker room.
Absolutely, but you can't help but just think about the long road it's been for Tampa Bay. I mean, this is basically year, I think, 5 or 6 of them being the cream of the crop of the NHL and finally getting it done just last year. So obviously there's still time for Nathan MacKinnon, to not have to panic, and eventually I think he will win something. But yeah, I just think there's a long way, and I think, it's more than just simply grit down in the depth portions of the lineup. It's more than just simply, hey, your big guys have to be your big guys at game time. I think there's something else they need to dig a little bit deeper because, again, they're a long way away from being
right. When you just look at things like the goaltending situation, how close were the Avalanche to just disaster before they signed Dubnyk, right? They were one injury away from their whole season falling apart immediately. You look at Montreal, so many guys, like Tyler Toffoli didn't do anything the entire series, and you're like, he's got to be hurt. He does not look like himself. Groin injury, right? Gallagher hurt himself in the last game. You could see it. He was done. Like the injuries on these teams really hurt, Montreal, I would say, more than Tampa. But that's where the depth needs to be. That's where it needs to fill in. And then you look at Montreal, guys like Cole Caulfield, the kid stepped right out of the NCAA and just went on a heater. He was tearing it up.
And I remember during his draft, he kept sliding and sliding and sliding till eventually Montreal took him. I bet you all those teams that passed on him right now after seeing what he did in his first couple months in the NHL are definitely slapping themselves in the head right now.
Teams that let Cale Makar go to the Avs. This is the same thing. He played, maybe because he played in the Alberta Junior Hockey League, he's not as enticing as somebody who played in the OHL, but look where he is.
Right. And essentially the Tampa Bay Lightning gave up Steve Downey to get Vasilevskiy.
I had totally just blocked that moment out of my mind, but that's the Colorado Avalanche trade. Right. Steve Downey ended up in Colorado. Kyle Quincy ended up in Detroit, and they get the pick. And it's Vasilevskiy. It's unreal.
Yeah, all part of it. How obviously scouting has a lot to do with it, but chance does too, right? I mean, just like the Cole Caulfield thing. So to put a bow on the Stanley Cup Finals here, Ryan, how would you grade the COVID playoffs as a whole? I mean, going into the season, we were like, I don't know if they'll be able to get it done by July 15th. There's a lot that goes into this. It's going to be really hectic. It's going to be really hard. Now that it's all behind us, how do you think the NHL did?
I think they did phenomenal work. It's unbelievable that they managed to have a postseason where, with all of the COVID positives and quarantine issues that they had all season, there were very few for the playoffs. The Blues obviously were impacted by some positive COVID tests. Deschamps is the hardest one for me to swallow. I think that's the major failure here. You have a team that, they had implemented new rules for fully vaccinated teams, and to fit that requirement meant 75% of the team and staff needed to be fully vaccinated, right? By the time Montreal traveled to Vegas, they had only had one shot because of the way that things are unfolding in Canada with the rollout. That sucks for them. They managed to win a bit without him. I think it may have hurt them a little bit at the start of this series. He's obviously a capable coach. I think he'll be the full-time coach there. That, to me, is the most disappointing thing is, he caught COVID somehow on the first road trip of the season. Other than that, I can't believe they pulled off what they did.
Absolutely. So, yeah, that starts our look at the offseason. So we'll get into that here in the next segment. Stick around through the break. We'll get right back into the Avalanche for you guys. We are a Colorado show after all. So thanks for hanging out with us here on Colorado's biggest and best live hockey radio show. This is the Hockey Show on Mile High Sports. JJ Jerez, Ryan Bolden, and of course Danny Bailey behind the glass. It's the Hockey Show. Letting it breathe a little. I like this one. Shout out to Luke in Winnipeg. He's probably vibing to it too. But time for us to look at all things Avalanche this offseason. That's what we're going to get into here this segment now that the season is officially behind us. It's our first offseason show of the year. So, some free agents on the hands of the Colorado Avalanche, as well as juggling the expansion draft and protection issues. So, couple guys, big names, Landeskog, Makar, Grubauer. Let's just start talking about those guys. Those are the free agents, obviously the focus for Joe Sakic right now. I think in that order as well, Landeskog, Makar, Grubauer. So just a broad stroke here. What are your overall thoughts on those three guys and their return to Colorado?
Well, I think Landeskog is going to be the hardest one. Obviously, Cale Makar is young. He's an RFA, right? So you're going to have to give him dump trucks full of money. You may be able to defer those dump trucks full of money for maybe one more contract, but then you're really going to have to pay him. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I guess word on the street is McKinnon said he'd be willing to take a little less money to stay competitive moving forward. But remember, he is on a
I didn't hear that.
I never saw it. He is on a terrible contract for him.
Yeah.
And a great contract for the Avs. He's going to get paid.
Pay
now,
him.
Exactly.
Pay that man his money.
Pay that man. Why you have to be so mad? Landeskog is deserving of lots of money too. And I think it's not just his play on the ice. I think it's the way that he handled the adversity, particularly in the 2016-17 atrocity of a season. He stood up. He was accountable. He was responsible to the media, to the fans. He was the face of that team's failure and had a pretty good year individually, so he wasn't the problem on the ice, right? So I think that, he's got some money due. The team should want to lock him down long term. I've been saying for a long time I could see Mikko Rantanen being the next captain of this team. So if there were a situation where they were going to walk away from Landeskog, I think it would be foolish to do so and not trade him, get something back, right? But I could see it working out where Mikko is captain potentially. However, Rantanen is on a $9,250,000 contract. He's making significantly more than McKinnon and Landeskog, who are both older than him, potentially have done better or more, in their career for this organization. So, Landeskog's getting paid, whether it's here or there.
A couple things to unpack in what you just said. I want to start with the Mikko Rantanen. You can see him being the eventual captain. Now, why would they skip over Nathan McKinnon? Is it simply just that, that little bit of attitude we know he has? We've seen it get better throughout the years, but we still see it show glimpses of itself. We most recently saw it after the loss to Vegas.
Was that a captain material type post-game press conference?
No, I'm not arguing. I just want you to clarify.
I just don't think that I think that he can lead by example on the ice. I don't think that he's a leader in the locker room. I don't think he's an interpersonal leader. I think he can be a bit divisive.
A finger pointer, if you will.
And in his personality, I think he can be a bit contentious. I don't think he has the kind of smooth going, like I can step in and say the right thing or have the hard conversation or take the blame. I don't think he necessarily shoulders that often.
Fair
Although
enough.
Rantanen has been fiery, like all season he was a fiery guy. You just wanted to be like, what's wrong? Who hurt you, Mikko?
COVID hurt him, I'm sure. He's tired of the way the world was going. But looking back into Landeskog, we've heard a couple names that are couple teams surrounding his name, and that's St. Louis and LA. Going back to that year that you brought up where he was still the stand-up captain that he needed to be and he would answer every question, that was also a time we saw his name floated around the LA Kings. And he's the one that said, no, I don't want to be traded. I'm staying here. But the LA Kings were showing a lot of interest in him. Sounds like LA is going to be big buyers this offseason. Another guy they're talking about taking, Brandon Saad. So with LA threatening and kind of hovering, they have some money to throw around despite having Drew Doughty, being one of the top paid people in the NHL. They've got some money to throw around. Is there any worry for you to lose Landeskog to LA? And secondly, does Brandon Saad, do you think that'd be an easy decision for him, or is he a guy that the Avalanche can maybe keep around here?
I don't know that Saad, I think, makes more sense for LA than Landeskog does. If you sign Landeskog, things have to go horribly wrong with the Avalanche to not sign him, right? So otherwise he gets traded to LA for what? They're not going to trade prospects for Landeskog. So they're in a rebuild. LA is a team that's looking to add some expensive players on sort of rental contracts to just hit the cap floor to remain somewhat competitive while they get these guys, Velarde and everybody experience, right? So I don't see Landeskog ending up there. I could see Saad ending up there, as a UFA on a 1-year deal, 2-year deal, making $5 million. He's an expensive guy. I think that he's worth the money on the whole. I think the Avalanche are better if they keep him on the lineup, but he's taking a spot from some of these younger guys that are kind of proving themselves. The question is, and I had the same question when they signed Belmar, is he worth the money in the roster spot that you could potentially slot a younger guy into and let him grow into that role? I thought Belmar exceeded my expectations. I thought Saad met my expectations. I think the Avalanche are better with him on the roster, but I could see Saad in LA. I don't see St. Louis having the money for either, really.
Right, which is another team being floated out there for Landeskog. And I think there's no way in hell we could shut that one down right now, that the Avalanche will let Gabe Landeskog walk and go to St. Louis. So
I would say one of the biggest mistakes that the organization ever did was not trading Paul Stastny and thinking they could re-sign him and then not getting to do that. You saw the way it hurt Columbus. Columbus really took it on the chin with guys leaving for nothing, Bobrovsky, Panarin, Duchesne. So I don't think the Avalanche would make that same mistake a second time.
Well, and here's my personal theory. Like I mentioned earlier, we have the expansion draft. That list is due next week. So by the time we're here for our next show, we'll be discussing the who was protected list and who was not. And with that, I think they're playing a little bit of, expansion games by not having signed Landeskog. I would almost guarantee you there's a verbal agreement in place. They're just waiting to execute it to see kind of the way this draft expansion pans out, because you either got to protect Landeskog or you don't. Chances are you do, but there's still, just because of him being a free agent, there's still definitely a ton of things that can happen.
Yeah, is it possible that the team has an unsigned contract agreement in place with Landeskog? Sure. Is it risky? It is, because it means that if they leave him exposed as a UFA, Seattle can have an exclusive window to negotiate a new contract with him, and they could also have an unsigned agreement in place and then not select him in the expansion draft and take somebody else and then sign him. It's a risky play either way. It's a very weird situation for the Avalanche to be in, because they have so many players not signed, and they have to expose, I believe, one forward and two defensemen, or one defenseman and two forwards that have had 40 games in the last season or 70 games of playing time in the last 2 seasons. They have to expose these guys. So sometimes you gotta sign a guy to expose him, like Jonas Johansson most likely will be.
Right, because when you look at the goaltending, apparently Francouz is exempt because he just hasn't played enough. He's on his, third, fourth year now with the team, but still hasn't gotten enough NHL games.
Well, he didn't play 70 games in the last 2 years. So,
right. So you don't have to protect him, which means you can use your protection on Grubauer, but you have to have one goalie exposed. So now that Johansson signing makes a lot more sense to me. At the time, I was like, what the heck are they doing? Are they just simply signing a guy to throw him in the AHL, even though he probably isn't even going to be very good down there? They still got guys down there too. But now I see what Joe Sakei's thinking, and all the more reason to kind of believe there's probably already a deal in place for Landeskog. There's something going on. There's no need for anybody to worry. They're just waiting to play their cards the way they deem appropriate.
When Devan Dubnyk will be exposed and could be a potential good option for them. It depends on what goalies around the league are available for Seattle, but Dubnyk could be a good option. And for the Avalanche, I don't foresee them signing him unless something is seriously wrong with Francouz's surgery situation. So, they take Dubnyk, and then all of the rest of these conversations are pointless because nobody else on the team gets taken. But there are a lot of players that are worth a look from Seattle.
Absolutely. I guess you want to get into a couple of those, or do you want to save that for the next
segment? Why don't we just start into it now? Yeah. I mean, you have two options with the expansion draft. You can either protect 7 forwards, 3 defensemen, and 1 goalie, or 8 forwards and defensemen and 1 goalie. So you're either getting 9 players protected or you're getting 11 players protected. Obviously, for most teams, makes sense to protect 11 players, but you have to make some tough decisions.
Right. The easy decisions are on the defensive end, right? It's easy to go Makar, Girard, Taves. Those are your protected. Then up top, of course, McKinnon, Rantanen, Kadri.
Well, hold on. Eric Johnson has a no-move clause, so he has to be protected unless he waives his no-move clause.
Which he has to do.
So that's one of your defensemen.
Which I think there's no way he doesn't move that clause.
Well, it's up to him.
Of course. But if you're him, do you really think Seattle's going to pick you if you're 32 years old, 33 now actually, overpaid, and coming off injury where you haven't played in almost a year?
I mean, he's getting paid regardless, so maybe he does the Avalanche a favor,
right,
and lets them expose him. I don't know that Seattle necessarily takes him, but they do have to take guys in a certain salary range in order to fill their salary cap bracket out. But let's say he doesn't waive it, right? So now you can only protect 2 other defensemen.
Yeah, now you're just Makar and Taves.
Makar, Taves, right? So you're exposing Girard, Graves, Nemeth.
Well, and if you're Seattle and Girard is out there, you take him because he's signed at, $5 million for a long time. I think the next 5 years or something like that. So he's a bargain play for what he accomplished last year, too. He'd be great. So we'll dive deeper into this here in our 4th and final segment of the show before we head out for the week. So stick around through the break. We'll be right back.
Forwards
here on The Hockey Show. JJ Derez, Ryan Bolding, Danny Bailey, Mile High Sports.
I play hockey and I fornicate because these are the 2 most fun things in cold weather.
Welcome back. No cold weather here. We're in mid-July, wrapping up an NHL season. Wild stuff. But that just means we got a shorter off season ahead of us, and we'll be right back to regular season play in no time. So between now and then, a lot to go on for the Colorado Avalanche. We're discussing the forward group and who they're going to be protecting for the upcoming expansion draft for the Seattle Kraken. Exciting to finally see the Seattle Kraken into fruition, right?
It's so crazy. They put out their preseason schedule, the Kraken, and you're like, it's real. It's really real. It's happening. This team is a part of the league now. They have a schedule.
Yep, I'm
they
excited.
have games on the slate.
It's going to look a little bit surreal at first, seeing their new jerseys and these new colors that you're not used to, kind of like it was with Vegas, but it only took a handful of, I mean, we just discussed, you got used to those Avs new blue helmets pretty quickly. I just saw a picture of Tyson Barrie with a black helmet back when he was with the Avs, and it already looks weird to me. So we'll get used to seeing these new colors and new jerseys in no time. But
I was actually out in California for the 4th of July, and I saw somebody wearing a Seattle Kraken t-shirt.
Let's go.
So
I've seen bumper
they're-
stickers.
They're real.
Yeah, it's out there.
I think
I've seen some Kraken hats and stuff.
And Seattle has a really amazing fan base no matter what sport. I mean, I remember when it was their first season in the MLS, and they had the best attendance in the entire league. And you're like, what is going on here? Why don't the Rapids have any fans? But that's another conversation.
And I do love that they did not go with the same colors that every other team in the Bay Area has. They're forging their own
bright
path.
green.
Yep. So forwards. We got to protect some forwards. If you have an opportunity to go to capfriendly.com, people out there in the world, they have a great expansion draft tool that lets you select players, and it keeps tabs on who is protected and who's not. You could do it for the entire league. That seems extreme, but we're doing that for the Avalanche. So right now, and we talked a little bit offline about this, I don't see a way that Eric Johnson agrees to waive his no-move clause. That doesn't benefit him necessarily, unless he does it and the Avs say, we'll do everything in our power to keep you, but we want to use that slot for somebody else.
How does it not benefit him to keep a guy like Sam Girard? Because you and I discussed last segment, of the 3 defensemen you're protecting, if Eric Johnson doesn't waive, Sam Girard's your guy out and probably going to get taken. So wouldn't he rather play with a guy like Sam Girard? We've seen the way that pairing works, and it benefits Eric Johnson greatly, rather than, next guy up, maybe even Bowen Byram or Connor Timmins. I think you'd rather, if you're Eric Johnson, you benefit yourself by waiving it because you're strengthening the team around you, ultimately giving yourself a better chance of winning a cup.
Yeah, but if he were selected by Seattle, it doesn't benefit him necessarily, right? You're leaving a favored Stanley Cup team to go to the question mark in the league, right? So I don't see it as being a benefit to him. So are we going to keep him protected or not?
I think in our hypothetical world here, he has waived his no move for us because we had a discussion.
Boy, is this wishful thinking.
We had the discussion with the Seattle front office, and they said, we have no interest in Eric Johnson. He's too old, he's too expensive, and we're looking to be competitive. We're not just looking to fill cap space here.
All right, so I'm protecting Girard, Taves, and Makar then. Moving on to forwards.
Forwards, I think this is easy when you look at the top.
Well, you got to take the top 3.
McKinnon, Rantanen, Landeskog. I think you throw Kadri. Even if you don't like that idea of him sticking around, he still is valuable trade bait, right?
Kadri has value to this team. They needed him in the playoffs. I don't know if you heard Eddie O talking about the Avalanche during the final games.
Imagine being Nazem Kadri and hearing that too.
Yeah, it was harsh reality there.
Right, exactly. But I like him on the team. But even if you're one of those guys that says he, doesn't bring it in the playoffs, he doesn't have the mindset we need, he still has value when there's guys out there on the market like Jack Eichel or Vlad Tarasenko. So I think he's a guy you keep around, if for nothing else, trade value. And then you get.
I think the Avs have a benefit of there are so many good players on this roster that could, one being left exposed, could save everyone else on the team, right? Like if you exposed Grubauer,
he's gone.
Mm-hmm. Everybody else on the team is safe.
Right. So
just looking at, so we've got Rantanen, McKinnon, Landeskog, Kadri protected. We've got 3 more spots.
I'm going to throw Burakovsky in there.
All right.
Not because he's anything amazing. I like the way he plays. I like his style. I love the way he plays next to Nathan McKinnon. He brings you some goals. But I think there's, again, a lot like Kadri, he could be a good piece that you kind of float out there as trade, because while he does bring some good stuff, there's more complete players just like him and for similar value.
Yep, I think he's good to keep on the team, and that leaves us with two more options to protect of Saad, Donskoy, Comfer, Calvert, Nichushkin, Belmar, Jost, and then down into the depth guys: Tynan, Dries, Sherwood, Barron, O'Connor, Lewis. That's Travis Barron, by the way.
If it's me, I think you're protecting Donskoy. Just because he does have a bit more to his game than, say, Jost or Comfer or Nichushkin. Donskoy can be a top 6 winger. Now, you're more comfortable with him down in your third pairing or your third line, and if you can fill out a roster where the talent kind of, helps you put him on the third line rather than forced to put him on the second line, then you're right where you need to be. But he's also getting up there in age, so I think he is expendable. I don't know. What do you think about Donskoy? Is he a protect or a non-protect?
Donskoy, I think you keep him. He's younger than Kadri. He's making a little bit less money. I thought he proved very valuable down the stretch. He's that kind of veteran winger presence that can slide up and down the lineup, like you said.
He was absent during the playoffs.
He's great. He's
absent.
The whole team was absent during the playoffs. So we'll put Donskoy in there.
Not Brandon Saad.
We got one left.
And I think I'm going to give it to Brandon Saad. If you could find a way to keep him and keep growing off of what he did this playoff. I mean, of course, he wasn't anything spectacular during the regular season, but he's the only guy that brought his A game and a consistent point production for you during the playoffs. You got to find a way to keep moving forward with him. I mean, I think there are some guys out there that could easily replace him, but why start from scratch on a player? We know how Jared Bednar brought in Carl Soderberg and Patrick Nemeth just for that consistency and that fluidity of bringing in a new guy. Well, Brandon Saad already knows your systems. He's starting to get comfortable with it, obviously, and can thrive in them.
So then if I'm Seattle, am I taking Ryan Graves, Eric Johnson, Devin Dubnyk, JT Compher, Matt Calvert's a question mark with his concussion situation, Nichushkin, Belmar, Jost?
Man, those are some good names. I think the 4 that really stand out to me are Dubnyk, Jost, Compher, and Graves. Now, if I'm Seattle, I think I like a guy like Graves. Now, when you compare Graves and Johnson, aren't they a very similar player? I mean, they're both big. They both play a similar role. One's a lot younger, one's a lot cheaper. So right there, I think you have your main reason for Eric Johnson not to worry about getting taken. I think Graves is the best option for Seattle if I'm Seattle. If I'm the Avalanche, I think it's Compher.
If I'm Seattle, I think I'm taking Compher. Right? There's a little bit of a stick it to the man concept behind this from Seattle's point of view, which is the Avalanche have too many defensemen. And you don't necessarily want to help them by taking one off their hands. You want them to have to figure out another way to get rid of somebody, right? Mm-hmm. Then they come to you and say, okay, how about we trade you Ryan Graves and you select JT Compher? A situation like that. I could see a deal coming out of this, but if I'm Seattle and this is the list, I'm probably going to take Compher. He helps with the financial aspect. He's got a couple years left on his deal. He can play. We're going to have to move that hotline out to Seattle.
And I think that benefits the Avalanche if they go Compher. I think it hurts more if they take Graves. Compher might help them, takes about $4 million off their books, if I'm not mistaken, and gives them some room to add some serious forward depth in a role that I don't think JT Compher really thrived in.
Yeah, we'll have to see how it goes. But,
7 days away.
Winging it off the top of our head, I still think Johnson doesn't waive and Sam Girard is gone.
Well, this is a conversation we'll revisit next Saturday when we come back here and do another episode of The Hockey Show for all you fine listeners. So thanks for hanging out with us. Don't forget to catch us on our YouTube podcast, everywhere podcasts are provided. We're live on the radio. We're live on Twitter. If you're missing us, you're just not paying attention.
You're not even trying.
So thanks for hanging out with us. We'll be back next week. Hockey Show, JJ Jerez, Ryan Bolding, Danny Bailey, right here on Mile High Sports. See ya.